You know, usually when you stand in front of a mirror in the morning, brushing your teeth and just getting ready for the day, there is this basic, unquestioned assumption of reality.
Right. You expect the glass to reflect you.
Exactly. It's the familiar arrangement of features you've known since childhood, following your every move in this perfectly safe, closed loop.
It provides a necessary anchor. I mean, the reflection confirms the boundary of who we believe ourselves to be in the waking world.
But imagine standing there and suddenly, something shifts.
In the reflection itself.
Not in the reflection exactly, but in the space between you and the glass. Like the eyes in the mirror seem to hold your gaze just a fraction of a second too long. Or you catch a fleeting glimpse of an expression, a sneer, a flash of panic, maybe a look of profound grief that you did not authorize.
Oh, that eerie, unsettling feeling that the mirror isn't showing you the whole truth.
Yes, that it's only reflecting this curated, socially acceptable surface. And today, for this deep dive, we are pulling that glass away to look at what lies beneath.
It is a phenomenal space to explore, honestly.
It really is. We are exploring the double life of desire. Basically, the architecture of why we routinely sabotage our own happiness, why we text that toxic ex, and why we freeze in terror right before a moment of genuine success.
Because what is pulsing right behind that acceptable surface is an entirely parallel existence. A life built of wishes that were never spoken, impulses that were ruthlessly suppressed, and, scenes from childhood that were folded away but never actually lost their energetic charge.
Right. We are talking about a fundamental split between what we consciously intend to do and what our unconscious minds and ultimately our bodies kind of force us to enact.
Yes. And getting into the mechanics of that split is where it gets really fascinating.
Let's do that, because we all know the basic Freudian map, right? The I driving the raw impulses, the ego managing reality, the superego enforcing the rules. But when we talk about a double life, I want to clarify for you listening, we aren't talking about a literal split personality or like a dissociative disorder here.
No, not at all. That distinction is crucial. It is one unified self operating with profoundly divided intentions.
Okay, so one psychic apparatus, but different forces.
Exactly. It houses forces that operate under entirely different laws of physics. I mean, the conscious mind operates on logic, linear time, and contradiction. But the unconscious, the territory of our most primitive desires, it does not understand time.
So a trauma from when you're 4 years old is...
It's happening with the exact same intensity at age 40. It doesn't fade. And more importantly, the unconscious completely lacks the capacity to process negation. It just does not understand the word no.
Wait, really? So if I say to myself, I absolutely do not want to think about calling my ex.
The unconscious only registers the desire to call. The negation is just static.
Oh, wow. That explains so much. So the wish itself is basically indestructible.
Precisely. When the direct expression of a wish is forbidden, whether by your parents, by society, or just your own ego's need for safety, that wish doesn't evaporate. It puts on a disguise. It routes itself through a detour to find expression.
I see this dynamic play out so often, even in situations that have nothing to do with, obvious trauma.
Give me an example.
Okay, consider this scenario. A man who consciously loves his partner, he values his marriage, he likes the stability of his life, and he speaks of his commitment with genuine sincerity. Yet, every single night, almost in a trance state, he finds himself on his phone.
Mindlessly scrolling.
Exactly. Scrolling through dating apps or social media, looking at the faces of strangers who mean absolutely nothing to him. And afterward, he feels this dull, heavy shame. He deletes the apps, he swears to be present, and the very next night, his hand reaches for the phone again.
And society looks at this and immediately slaps a moral label on it, right?
Yeah. People say he lacks discipline or he's fundamentally dissatisfied with his life.
But if we approach this from an analytic perspective, we completely discard that moral judgment.
Right.
We don't ask why he is undisciplined. We ask what specific historical wish is being served by this repetitive symptom.
And what would that be?
Well, the scrolling is what we call a compromise formation.
Let's break down the mechanics of that compromise. What two forces are actually negotiating there?
On one side, you have his conscious ego, which desperately wants to maintain the safety and love of his marriage. On the other side, you have an unconscious prohibition that was likely forged in childhood.
Like a rule he internalized.
Exactly. Imagine this man as a young boy who learned that wanting something too deeply is incredibly dangerous. Perhaps his primary caregiver was emotionally volatile, and he internalized rule-deep desire leads to devastating abandonment. To want fiercely is to risk total annihilation when the object of your desire is taken away.
Oh man, so the marriage itself is actually the threat. Because he has secured the thing he truly wants, his unconscious is sounding alarms. It's terrified that the inevitable abandonment is coming.
You've hit the exact mechanism. The unconscious orchestrates a diversion to relieve that unbearable anxiety. It detaches a portion of his raw desire from his wife and attaches it to something utterly meaningless.
Pixelated faces on a screen.
Right. By doing this, he satisfies the conscious wish to stay married, while his unconscious gets to act out a controlled betrayal. He is essentially proving to his ancient fear, look, I am not risking my whole heart. I am safe.
The symptom looks like a betrayal of his marriage, but structurally, it's this ironclad fidelity to a childhood survival mechanism.
Yes. It's a solution to a problem he doesn't even remember having.
That completely reframes self-sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
But this requires an immense amount of internal deception. If the ego is going to such extreme lengths to build these devices, how does our internal judge the superego let us get away with it?
What do you mean?
Well, we usually treat the superego like an internal hall monitor, right?
Yeah.
Just checking boxes for good behavior and wagging a finger when we stray.
That is the most common misconception about the superego, and correcting it unlocks so much of our daily suffering. The superego is not just a moral compass, it is deeply, inherently sadistic.
Sadistic.
Yes. It derives a perverse, grim satisfaction from our transgressions. The stricter your internal judge, the more elaborate and punishing your symptoms will be. The superego actually feeds on the guilt generated by your bad behavior.
So the punishment itself becomes the psychological reward.
It does. Let's say you have a massive opportunity at work, something you've consciously worked toward for years. Suddenly, you are paralyzed by anxiety, you procrastinate, and you effectively ruin your own chances.
I mean, I've definitely done that.
Most of us have. But that failure isn't just an obstacle. It is the tribute you are paying to remain loyal to an unconscious identification. Perhaps you had a parent who suffered endlessly, who firmly believed that success was a scam or that the world was rigged against them.
So to succeed consciously would mean emotionally abandoning that parent.
Exactly. Your unconscious orchestrates failure out of a tragic, distorted love. You maintain the psychic bond with the parent, and your superego gets to brutally punish you for wanting more than you were permitted. The internal economy is balanced, but your conscious life is in ruins.
Wow. And to avoid looking at that internal wreckage, the ego deploys defense mechanisms. Projection is the classic one we all see, where we externalize what we cannot tolerate within ourselves.
Right. Like the person who constantly complains that their partner is controlling and suffocating.
Yeah, but in reality, they might actually be harboring a deep, completely unacceptable urge to dominate the partner themselves, because they view themselves as a gentle, egalitarian person. That aggressive impulse is terrifying.
So they package it up and throw it onto their partner.
And suddenly, they get to play the victim of the very dynamic they are secretly creating.
And the brilliance of projection is that the individual will unconsciously provoke the partner until the partner actually does act controlling. It validates the projection and closes the loop. It is a masterpiece of psychic engineering.
It really is. I see how projection works as a deflection, but I want to genuinely push back on another defense mechanism reaction formation.
Okay, let's explore that.
If someone is harboring a deeply unacceptable impulse, let's say a profound, suffocating rage toward an aging parent who demands constant care, why wouldn't the unconscious just default to avoidance?
Meaning?
Why not just move across the country and distance yourself? Why exert the immense, exhausting psychological energy required to drive that impulse into reverse and become a hyper-devoted, self-sacrificing caretaker? What is the psychic payoff for doing the exact opposite?
That is a phenomenal question, and it gets to the heart of our psychic economy.
Yeah.
Avoidance, like moving across the country, doesn't actually solve the energetic problem of the rage.
Because the anger is still there.
Yes, the rage is a profound attachment.
Yeah.
It is a massive concentration of emotional energy tied to that parent. If you just leave, that energy remains unresolved and threatens to flood the ego with guilt. Reaction formation solves this by utilizing the energy of the rage, but flipping its outward expression.
So the devotion is actually fueled by the hostility.
Yes. The hyper-devotion allows the person to remain intensely, intimately tethered to the object of their rage. They get to control the parent, monitor the parent, and completely dominate the parent's life under the impenetrable disguise of absolute virtue.
The conscious self gets to feel righteous and morally pure, completely protected from the terror of their own hatred, while the unconscious gets to execute its aggressive need for control.
Exactly. This is why people operating out of reaction formation often seem so rigid and intense in their morality. The zealotry is the lock on the basement door, keeping the opposite impulse contained.
That makes so much sense. The energy has to go somewhere, so it just wears a mask.
Yeah.
But if these structures, the projection, the self-sabotage, the reaction formation, if they cost us so much conscious happiness, why do we constantly put ourselves back in the line of fire?
You're talking about repeating mistakes.
Yeah. Why do we repeatedly date the same unavailable people or recreate the same toxic work environments?
You are pointing toward a concept called the compulsion to repeat. Consciously, we believe human beings are wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. But the unconscious operates on a completely different metric.
It doesn't seek pleasure.
No, it seeks familiarity. The ego prefers a predictable misery over an unpredictable joy, because unpredictability is associated with the original trauma.
I've always visualized this using a specific image. Imagine the mind is a vast ocean. The repressed memory, the original trauma, isn't gone just because it sank to the bottom. It's like a massive shipwreck resting on the ocean floor.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to frame it.
Right. You can't see the ship from the surface, but its sheer size and architecture fundamentally alter the ocean currents above it. You're sailing along, trying to navigate your life, and suddenly the water is swirling unnaturally, pulling your boat dangerously off course.
Yes.
The symptom we see, the anxiety attack, the repetition of a bad relationship, is just the surface water reacting to the gravitational pull of a wreck we completely forgot was down there.
I love that analogy because it perfectly captures the invisible physics of the mind. The shipwreck continues to shape the current. Take the individual who continually chooses emotionally withdrawn, unavailable partners.
Consciously, they're desperately seeking secure love.
But unconsciously, they're steering their boat directly into the familiar currents of childhood abandonment.
Because the pain of being rejected is a known entity. To actually accept a secure, available partner would mean navigating entirely unmapped waters.
It would require dismantling the entire psychic structure they built to survive their childhood. It goes even deeper than safety. It is about loyalty.
Loyalty to who?
To their past. Consider a child who only ever received affection or attention from their parents when they were physically ill. When they were healthy, they were neglected.
So they associate sickness with love.
Right. That child internalizes a devastating equation. Suffering is the only currency that buys love. As an adult, they might develop chronic somatic issues or constantly find themselves in states of emotional crisis.
It is not because they enjoy hurting. It is because their unconscious believes that to heal, to be whole and independent, is to become invisible.
Exactly. Healing feels like a betrayal of the only love they ever knew. When patients fiercely resist getting better, it is rarely just stubbornness. To relinquish this symptom means severing a deep, unconscious faithfulness to their history.
Man! But if these currents are operating entirely beneath our conscious awareness, how do we ever intercept them? I mean, how do we read the signals of the unconscious before we crash the boat?
The unconscious is constantly speaking to us, but it communicates in a language we refuse to learn. When the mind cannot process an emotion, the body absorbs it.
The body literally becomes the theater where the repressed drama is acted out.
Yes. We see this brilliantly in early psychoanalytic case studies, like the famous case of a woman who developed a severe physical symptom where, for weeks, she was entirely unable to drink a glass of water.
Oh, right. Her throat would physically close up, preventing her from swallowing, even though she was desperately thirsty.
And there was no biological cause whatsoever. Through analysis, they traced the symptom back to a specific repressed memory. She had walked into a room and seen a dog drinking water from a glass.
Which filled her with disgust.
An overwhelming, unprocessable disgust. But because the social setting or her own ego wouldn't allow her to express that profound revulsion in the moment, the emotion, the effect, was severed from the memory.
But psychic energy can't just be destroyed.
No, the energy had to discharge. So the disgust bypassed her conscious mind and innervated her physical nervous system, her throat paralyzed.
So the physical inability to swallow water was a literal somatic translation of the psychological stance. I refuse to take this in.
Her body was remembering what her mind insisted on forgetting. The cure was not treating the throat, it was bringing the memory of the dog back into consciousness, so the trapped emotional energy could finally be metabolized.
That is the ultimate proof that the mind and body aren't separate entities. But the other major venue for this language, of course, is dreams. And it seems like people fundamentally misunderstand how dreams operate.
They really do.
We treat them like universal dictionaries, right? Like if you dream your teeth are falling out, it means you're stressed about money, or if you dream of falling, you're losing control.
Those universal dictionaries are completely useless. The mechanism that constructs dreams, the dream work, is essentially a master of disguise. When you sleep, the ego's defenses relax just enough for forbidden wishes to rise up, but the sensor is still partially active.
So the raw, unacceptable desire is distorted.
Distorted, condensed, and projected into bizarre imagery just to sneak past the border guards into your awareness.
So a dream of crumbling teeth isn't about dental hygiene.
Usually it relates to a profound anxiety around the loss of power. The power to speak, to bite back against an aggressor, or to consume.
And a dream of falling.
It might not be about gravity at all, but a deeply repressed, terrifying desire to finally surrender the exhausting control you exert over your waking life. But these images are personal hieroglyphs.
Meaning they change based on the person.
Exactly. A snake in a dream means something entirely different to a herpetologist than it does to someone who was bitten as a child. To decode the dream, you have to follow the highly idiosyncratic emotional associations of the individual dreamer.
Okay, so we have this timeless, illogical force driving our behavior. It speaks in somatic throat paralysis and bizarre dream logic. It forces us to repeat our worst traumas, and it uses our own moral compass to punish us for wanting things.
That sums it up.
Structurally, how do we intervene? How does sitting on a couch in a room with an analyst actually disrupt a system that is this heavily fortified?
It begins with a radical shift in the goal itself. The objective of doing this deeply introspective work is not to fuse the conscious and unconscious into some seamless, enlightened harmony. That is a fantasy.
Wait, but isn't the whole point to resolve the conflict? To stop the war inside the self?
You don't want to extinguish the conflict entirely. The tension between your primal desires and your civilizing prohibitions, and that friction, is the engine of human creativity, ambition, and depth.
So to be human is to be fundamentally split.
Yes. The goal of the therapeutic setting is not to destroy the double life, but to build a bridge across the chasm, turning a silent, destructive war into a conscious conversation.
And how exactly is that bridge built? Because I think we all know intellectually what our issues are. I can sit here and trace my anxieties back to my childhood, but the moment the stakes are high, my heart still races and I still default to my old defenses.
Because intellectual insight is clearly not enough. Insight is just the surface. What actually shifts the psychological architecture is the phenomenon of transference.
Transference, what happens there?
When you enter the analytic space, you don't just sit there reciting the history of your childhood. Because the unconscious is timeless, you eventually begin to relive your childhood right there in the room, projecting the unresolved emotional dynamics of your past onto the blank slate of the analyst.
So if I had a father who was emotionally distant and highly critical,
You might eventually start experiencing my quiet listening as a harsh, withholding judgment. The neutral silence of the analyst is intolerable to the ego. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the psyche will rush to fill that silence with its most familiar ghosts.
I see.
You will feel with absolute visceral reality that I am criticizing you. The old neural pathways fire up, the defense mechanisms deploy, and the child in you braces for the devastating critique.
You bring the shipwreck up to the surface?
You bring the wreck into the room. But here is the critical mechanism of change. When you project that hostile father onto the analyst does not react the way the father did.
Right. You don't criticize, you don't abandon me.
I simply observe and survive the projection.
So you are forced to experience a completely new ending to an ancient script.
Yes, the rigid, repetitive loop is finally broken. The fear is spoken, the rage is safely directed, and the relationship is not destroyed. That profoundly new emotional experience, happening in real time, rewires the psychic economy.
It proves to the unconscious that the old defenses are no longer necessary for survival. That is incredible. It completely changes how we should view our own flaws, our symptoms, our anxieties, those embarrassing repetitions we hate about ourselves. They aren't a sign that we are broken or defective.
They are actually incredibly faithful, hard-working messengers trying to protect a fragile vulnerability that we learned we had to hide.
They're your most loyal guardians, and I think that invites a profound shift in how we observe ourselves. Which brings me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over on your own.
It's an important reflection to take away.
Think about the one recurring habit or emotional reaction you despise most about yourself, the one you've been trying to fix for years. Instead of asking how to destroy it, ask yourself, if this habit was actually a loyal guardian protecting a younger version of you, what is it trying to keep safe?
What is it protecting?
Exactly. What a phenomenal lens to look through. The next time you catch that unfamiliar flicker in the mirror or find yourself caught in a current you didn't choose, remember that the symptom is just a substitute for a truth waiting to be spoken. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.